Welcome to lecture 23 of International Finance, and in this video we are going to understand different exchange rate parities. So moving towards the contents, we would discuss what purchasing power parity is. Then we would see what is international Fisher effect. Then what is the impact of this purchasing power parity and international Fisher effect on exchange rate systems or changes? How does this theory and this theory suggest that exchange rate would change? These are different theories. And then we would compare the purchasing power theory, the international Fisher effect, and previously we studied another theory which was interest rate parity. We would compare these theories. So first, starting with the purchasing power parity. Now what this parity means, it means equality, right? So in simple words, let's just see what this theory says in simple words, and then we would build our idea on that, on different justifications. So parity means equality, and we know what purchasing power means. So what this purchasing power parity states that, it says that the purchasing power in country A would be equal to the purchasing power in country B. What does that mean? Say for example, if the inflation increases in country A, but it remains same in country B, the inflation. So the purchasing power will decrease in this country. However, it would remain same in this country B. So if the purchasing power would decrease due to this inflation, the prices would increase obviously the inflation means that prices would increase. If the prices would increase in this country A, then what would citizens of this country A do is that they would buy products from country B. During this process of importing goods from country B, the exchange rate of these two countries would change in a way that their purchasing power becomes same. What does this mean is that a citizen of country A, whether he buys the products from its own country or from country B, it would cost him the same amount in terms of a same currency, right? So it would not be advantageous for the citizen of country A to buy products from country B. And this would only happen because of the changes in exchange rate. So what this purchasing power parity would help us is determine how much will be this change, how much the exchange rate would change. Right? This theory would help us in determining this change. But the idea is that purchasing power would remain same. Okay, so an increase in inflation would decrease the value of currency. Now, why is that so? If we continue this example, if there is inflation in country A, its prices would increase. Let's say this country A is Pakistan, and this country B is say US. So currently, if say $1 is equal to 100 rupees, this is the exchange rate. If the prices would increase, if there is inflation in Pakistan, prices would increase of commodities, and Pakistan would start importing from US, because for Pakistani citizens, the US products now become cheaper. Once they start to buy these products, they would obviously sell rupees and buy dollars. Hence, the demand of dollars would increase and the supply of rupees would also increase. So rupees would depreciate and dollar would appreciate. Previously, if the exchange rate was 100 rupees per dollar, now it might become 150 rupees per dollar. Now, if a product costed $1 in US and previously to buy $1 $1 product it costed 100 rupees, now the similar $1 product would cost 150 rupees for a Pakistani citizen because of this change in exchange rate. So what we just discussed is that the increase in inflation would decrease the value of currency. We have just discussed the reason, and we have already understood this multiple times during the lecture of determinants of exchange rate. Okay. So purchasing power theory attempts to quantify this inflation exchange rate relationship. So we know that we have discussed this multiple times is if inflation increases, the exchange rate would decrease or the currency would depreciate. But if inflation increases by 2%, then by how much percentage the currency would depreciate, we do not know this. Right? So this purchasing power parity would help us in quantifying this relationship of inflation and interest rate. It would tell us that if inflation increases by 2%, then the currency, the rupees, would depreciate by this much percentage. We would come back to this percentage or quantification in a while, but before that, let's look at two different variations of purchase power parity. So this theory is divided into two different forms. One is the absolute form. So the absolute form of purchasing power parity suggests that the prices of the same product in different countries will be equal when measured in common currency. So what we just saw is that inflation in Pakistan increases and that of the US remains the same, then people start buying the products from US, and either the products would become expensive in US or the exchange rate would change in a way that now the purchasing power in Pakistan and US becomes same. Right? So it doesn't matter whether a Pakistani citizen buy that product from Pakistan or US. So this is what absolute purchasing power parity suggests, is that absolute form of purchasing power parity suggests that the prices of the same product in different countries should be equal when measured in the common currency. But obviously, there are some other factors that do play a role. There are certain market imperfections like transportation cost, tariffs, quotas. It says that the rate of price change should be similar. What this means is that although the so if we continue this previous example, and now if the inflation in Pakistan increases, according to absolute purchase power parity, Pakistani citizen would start buying from US. But according to relative form of purchasing power parity, it states that it is not necessary because there would be some transportation cost, and if we take into the account the transportation cost, even if inflation is higher in Pakistan, people would not buy it from products from US because of higher transportation cost or because there are certain tariffs. For example, cars are expensive in Pakistan, but people would not start buying them from US because there is certain custom duties that we would have to pay, and there is some transportation cost that would occur due to that. Even if the prices increases in Pakistan, people would not shift their consumption to US. Or there is certain government restrictions. For example, the restriction is that people cannot import cars, right? Even in that case, even if the inflation increases, the consumption would not shift to any other countries, right? So what absolute purchasing power parity suggests is that it do not take into the account the market imperfection, the real-time situations, But relative purchasing power parity takes into account the situations, and it says that it would change, the people would shift, but it is not necessary that it would happen always or in the same way that we anticipate. But the essence of purchasing power parity would remain, whether it is absolute or relative purchase power parity. So if in this example, Pakistan inflation was increases to 7% and the UK inflation increases by 5%, then this purchasing power parity suggests that pound would appreciate by almost 2%, or rupees would depreciate by almost 2%. So coming towards the rationale behind the purchasing power parity, we have already previous slides discussed this, but let's go through this slide. So suppose Pakistan inflation is greater than UK inflation. So in previous slide, we saw that Pakistan inflation was 7% and UK's inflation was 5%. What would happen? What would be the effect? Pakistan's import of UK product would increase because now UK's products are cheaper. And because Pakistani's products are expensive for UK citizens, so Pakistan's export to UK would decrease, right? This would put an upward pressure on the pound, because if we import from UK, we would need to buy pounds to pay them. And this shift in consumption and the pound's appreciation will continue. This process would happen till in Pakistan the price of the UK products is greater than or equal to the price of Pakistani products, right? So UK would stop, or in Pakistan the people would stop importing from UK if the UK product's price is greater than the price in Pakistan, or at least equal. Or people in UK would start importing from Pakistan if the price of Pakistani products is less than or equal to price of UK. So in essence, either the price in UK and Pakistan should be equal, or this process would happen till the price of the UK products, because people in Pakistan are importing them, it becomes greater than or equal to the price in Pakistan. So if we derive a formula using this purchasing power parity, assume the exchange rate are initially in equilibrium, then the home country experiences a 5% inflation, while the foreign country experiences a 3% inflation. So the prices of products in home country would be previous price into 1 plus the inflation of home country, right? And price in foreign country would be equal to the previous price plus into the 1 plus inflation of previous country, and the multiplied by exchange rate, if we convert that into a same commodity. We are just deriving the formula. So you know that where this formula is coming from. So for purchasing power parity to hold, we say that purchasing power parity only hold when the prices in home country is equal to the prices in foreign country if it is measured in same currency. So that means that the price in home country should be equal to the price in foreign country. And if we simplify this equation, then the change in currency, this is the change in foreign currency, would be equal to 1 plus inflation in home country and 1 plus the inflation IF, which is inflation in foreign country. minus 1. So this becomes the formula to measure the change in the exchange rate. Remember, in starting slide we said we would quantify, right? We would quantify that if inflation changes, by how much percentage the exchange rate would change. Using this equation we have quantified it. So if inflation in home country is greater than inflation in foreign country, then foreign currency will appreciate and home currency will depreciate. Remember, the idea is simple. The country whose inflation is higher, its currency will depreciate. So if home country's inflation is higher than foreign country's inflation, then the home currency will depreciate and the foreign currency will appreciate. And if opposite is the situation, if home country's inflation is lesser than foreign country's inflation, then remember, the countries whose inflation is higher, its currency would depreciate. So in this case, foreign countries' inflation is higher, so its currency will depreciate, and home country's inflation is low, so home currency will appreciate. Okay, so what purchasing power parity suggests is that this is purchasing power parity line, this blue line, and it says that if this is the inflation differential, the difference between inflation of home and the foreign country. So if, say, home country's inflation is 1% higher than foreign country, then what do you think would happen to the foreign currency? Would it appreciate or depreciate? So this is what I said. If inflation of home country is higher than inflation of foreign countries, you can just go back to the previous slide and check that foreign currency would appreciate. So this is what this line suggests, that foreign currency would appreciate, but by how much percent? Approximately 1%. Right? We would have an example in next slide, a numerical example in next slide. But just to give you an idea, if home country inflation is 1% greater than foreign country inflation, that is the inflation differential IH minus IF, it is +1. That means home country's inflation is greater than foreign country inflation. Then the percentage change in foreign countries' exchange rate would be +1. So foreign countries would currency would appreciate. So if the inflation in home country is 3% higher than the foreign country's inflation, then foreign currency would appreciate by 3%. And similarly, if the inflation in foreign currency is higher than inflation in home currency, so if this is the case, by 1%, so obviously foreign currency would depreciate by 1%. So it would depreciate by 1%. That's what -1 suggests. Okay, so we have this example. This example examines the situation when foreign inflation exceeds home inflation. Obviously, if foreign inflation is greater than home inflation, what would happen to foreign currency? It would depreciate. You should immediately know that the currency whose inflation is higher should depreciate. Assume that the exchange rate is in equilibrium initially. Then the home country experiences a 4% inflation rate, while a foreign country experiences a 7% inflation rate. The questions ask us that how will currency change according to purchasing power parity. So remember, the formula is change in exchange rate is equal to 1 plus IH, that is inflation in home country, divided by 1 plus IF, that is inflation in foreign country, minus 1, right? So in this example, if the home inflation is 4% and the foreign inflation is 7%, then what would happen to the foreign currency? Remember, we need the answer in terms of foreign currency, right? So this would be 0.97 minus 1. So this is the simplification of this part of the equation, and this would give us minus 0.02 or 2%. Minus 2%. So what this minus 2% means is that foreign currency will depreciate by 2%, right? Remember, in initial slide we said this purchasing power parity would help us in quantification of the effect of inflation on exchange rate, and it helped us in quantifying. So let me go through this example. We had the inflation of home country and we had the inflation of foreign country. Our question is that what would be the change in exchange rate? But this change is, we are not talking about the change of the home country, but the foreign currency. It doesn't matter if the foreign currency would depreciate by 2%, then the home currency would appreciate by 2%. It is one in the same thing, but this formula would give us the answer of the change in foreign currency. So you don't need to confuse that. The formula is 1 plus inflation of home country divided by 1 plus inflation of foreign country minus 1. So in this case, it says that the home country experiences 4% inflation, so 1 plus 0.04, and the foreign country experiences 7% inflation, so it is 1.07 minus 1. This is the formula. So if we simplify this part, we get 0.97 minus 1, we get minus 0.02 or minus 2%. This minus 2% means that the foreign currency would depreciate by 2%. This minus means depreciation. If there was a plus, it would mean appreciation. Remember, this minus 2 doesn't mean that the home currency would depreciate. It means that the foreign currency would depreciate. This formula is for the percentage change in the foreign currency. And even if you just look at the exchange rates, it is quite understandable that 7% is the inflation of foreign country. So this is IF, and the home inflation rate is, this is IH home. So if IF is greater than IH, we saw in previous slide, if IF is greater than IH, so foreign country's currency would depreciate and home currency would appreciate. So whichever country have higher inflation, its currency would depreciate. And by the way, what is the difference between 7 and 4? So it's almost, so if we deduct, we get 3, but the change would be 2%, right? So the change in currency in exchange rate is not exactly the differential, but it is approximately equal to the home and foreign inflation differential. Okay, so what are certain reasons that the purchasing power parity theory will not hold? Remember, what purchasing power parity theory says is that if inflation increases, the exchange rate, the foreign currency would depreciate, or foreign currency's exchange rate would depreciate. So we are going to discuss certain reasons why this purchasing power parity would not hold, why there would be an increase in inflation and not decrease in the exchange rate. It happens, right? So one reason is called confounding effect. What this means is that exchange rate is not only affected by inflation. There are lots of factors that affect exchange rate, right? There is income, there is interest rate, there is government restrictions, there is speculation in the currency. So these exchange rates are also affected by other factors such as interest rate, income level, government control, and expectation of future rates. So even if inflation increases, there would be other factors that would play a different role, and hence the currency would not depreciate even after the increase in inflation. The second reason for purchasing power parity not to hold is the lack of substitute for a traded goods. For this, we would have to go back to the rationale or the reason for this purchasing power parity to happen. Remember, we said if rupees Pakistan had higher inflation as compared to US, what would happen then? I mean, what was the reason that I explained? I said that Pakistani citizen would start buying products from US, right? But what if the substitute for the product is not available in foreign country? For example, we are buying certain kind of product for which the substitute is not available in US. Then in that case, the purchasing power parity would not hold. Obviously, if so, because the effect of inflation is not direct, the effect of inflation is due to the export and import. If the export and import would change, then it would change the exchange rate, and hence it would lead to a change in the exchange rate. So idea is, if that the substitute product is not available, then the demand would not shift to another country. Okay, so if I recap this whole lecture, we started with the idea that there is a theory which is called purchase power theory, purchase power parity, and parity means equality. This theory suggests that there should be equality in purchasing power. We saw there are two forms of purchasing power parity. One is called absolute form and the second is relative form. The difference is just that relative form takes into account the market imperfections, the market realities. So absolute says that if the inflation increases, then exchange rate would definitely decrease, but relative says that if inflation increases, then the exchange rate might decrease because there are other factors that would take into play. Then we saw that, remember in the first slide we saw we need to quantify. So we quantified the effect of inflation on exchange rate using this formula. So we say that this is the formula through which we would quantify the effect of exchange rate, inflation on the exchange rate. Okay, so in next video we will explore another theory, which is international Fisher effect. And in this video we saw the effect of inflation on exchange rate changes, but in next video we are going to discuss the effect of interest on exchange rate changes.